Good morning. I'm Mark Allen, Director at Gaper.io. I'm here today with Colin Rand, the VP of Engineering of Banyan Security.io. Good morning, Colin.
Good morning to you as well. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I see we're at opposite sides of the bay here. So
Yeah, since nobody's going to be in San Francisco right now, we're all looking at our backgrounds.
yes, I understand. So to start with, can you share a brief background of yourself and your work experience?
Sure, certainly. So I've been in engineering since the mid 90s, working on a mixture of startups, early stage, my own startups, as well as doing some consulting. And lately, in the last 10 years or so, I've been focusing on a lot of big data and security technologies in the enterprise B2B space. So both as an programmer in the early days and most recently as engineering leadership, VP of engineering style roles.
Ah, very interesting. So what has been your experience with remote employment, both as a remote employee and a remote employer?
So most recently, I've been running an engineering team that is completely distributed. So we've been together for about 2 years, and we have team members in Texas and Portland and Switzerland. We had a few in Central America for a little while. So the team by default was completely distributed. What was interesting is that the rest of the engineering department at the company was not distributed. They were concentrated in a few major R&D centers. And so we had to establish what the cultural differences, what the practices are that would work for us, and how do we raise awareness to other teams about how our style is different than their style. So for example, one of the big challenges is that when you're on site in a physical room, a lot of the team members would sit around the table and they would have one camera looking at the table. And when they wanted to talk, they would go on mute. Everybody that's remote all of a sudden gets cut off from that conversation, and you feel displaced, you feel marginalized. And so we had to really do a lot of leaning into the teams that were on site to help them understand what it's like to work with remote people, to keep them fully engaged, because it's very easy when you're remote in that situation to tune out and just start slacking or checking email or doing other activities.
Yeah, no, I've been on both ends of that. I certainly understand it. So what do you think is the future of remote employment, since you've been doing it for a while? And
Yeah.
what do you think needs to be done to make it more effective?
Yeah, I think one of the things we talk about on doing remote team is there's nothing inherently different than working on site. You just have to take all your best practices when you're sitting in a room, and you have to do them even more so. So for example, it's always a best practice when you're in a meeting to make sure everybody in the meeting has a chance to weigh in with their idea. You check in with, say, okay, you've been quiet, what is your thought? Give everybody a chance to speak. That's a good best practice for a meeting, is to really make sure everybody's engaged. So when you go remote, it's even more so. It even amplifies the need to get everybody to check in and feel like they're engaged and participate. So there's some cultural best practices that we already do. It was much like 20 years ago when agile programming came around. There wasn't anything new about it. It was just all the best practices we had let slide over the years. We just had to really bring them back to the forefront and be more disciplined about it. So a lot of remote work is just taking our existing best practices and then being a lot more disciplined about it. But when you do that, you feel the dynamic change, and there's a real qualitative difference to the experience when you follow these practices. And this is, of course, there's an assumption that your IT works, right? So if you're in an office and your IT doesn't work, you're not productive. Sure, we need a different set of IT. We need different types of network configurations when you're remote in order to make sure you're secure and you can access all the services you need to. And so IT is still critical, only more so.
Yeah, it's interesting because most people, when I interview them, they talk about that stuff, the IT stuff, and you're talking more about the cultural stuff, which is interesting. Because yeah, I mean, the IT stuff, if you have a good IT staff, they're going to take care of that stuff. I mean, they should have anyway. All that stuff should already be in place.
It should be the discipline that they already had, and only more so now.
Yeah, I agree. So what's the story behind Banyan Security? And I'm normally I say, what's the journey been like? But it's a fairly new journey, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm actually starting in about a week. So I'm very excited to join. So Banyan Security does zero trust networking. in today's environment, and a lot of remote workers are experiencing this right now, when they need to access services that are internal, you go through a VPN, which is a piece of hardware, but there's lots of challenges with working with VPNs. They can be very expensive to maintain. They have limited capacity. An anecdote here, I was on a call with a large customer recently, and we were doing a big Zoom session, and they had an explicit policy put in place saying they could not do video on the Zoom because they had to save bandwidth because all of their traffic was tunneled through the VPN. So it was very challenging then to establish the more cultural sides of the remote meetings that we were talking about when they all had to dial in. We couldn't see them because the face-to-face is really critical. So Banyan popped onto my radar because when I was at the current development team, we were doing work that had to orchestrate a developer between AWS, the public cloud, and an internal infrastructure that we were maintaining, and our VPN just was not working well. Mm-hmm. And we couldn't do the automation we wanted. It was hard to work with IT. They had other priorities, and we were left with just a really awful challenge. And so when I got a call saying there's this new company doing zero trust in the model of Google Biancore, it immediately was like, wow, I have that pain. I do a lot of startups and young companies. So I was at a company before called Lookout Mobile Security. Whenever I see we're having a technical problem and we're having a lot of pain solving it, and somebody calls me and says, hey, I think we have a solution to it, I know that that's going to be something that is much more widespread because we're usually on the advanced edge of IT adoption. And so here, I was having this explicit pain. I couldn't reach externally. Like I had my remote team. We had trouble reaching internal networks. Our VPN was unstable. We had trouble going between AWS and these services. And so their value prop just deeply resonated with me. And so I met the founding team, fantastic group, great background, met the backers, and super excited to be joining.
And just so I know, is it an existing company that you're joining, or is it a new company?
Yeah. No, they've been around for about 4 years.
Okay.
And really been working on the deep technology. The technology with the public key infrastructure that you have to do to make sure that the certificates are exchanged and the trust is established between the service and the clients that need to access the service. Really challenging technology to put together. And so they've really been working over the past 4 years to solidify the product and the fit. And now they've got something, it's working, got a couple of big deployments, and we're going to pour some gas on the company.
Cool.
So in a good way.
Yeah, I understand what you mean. So the concept of incorporating remote in your company, I mean, you're coming from a unique standpoint because you've done it, and I'm assuming you're going to do it again.
Yeah. So there's a funny anecdote. So when I was meeting with the team, and the first time I met them, they were in a small office space. They raised some capital in the fall, so in the November timeframe. So they had a small office right when I met them, and they were getting a brand new office space with the new capital. It's, so I went and visited it. It's down by SF MoMA, kind of in that area, beautiful loft space. It was good for about 30 people or so. So they're there for a week, and then they had to shut down the office, and we're all remote. So I will be joining as a remote first employee and helping them to figure out what it's like if, we are hiring a few new people and they're going to be coming on to a company that's completely distributed. So, obviously San Francisco is on lockdown, will be for the foreseeable future. And so overnight we've become a completely distributed remote company.
Wow.
So it's been pretty interesting to go through this. And it reminds me of one of the things when I was working with distributed teams. I was initially working in San Francisco, but my team was distributed, and I would periodically work remote to really develop that empathy of what it's like to be remote, and then go into the office and feel what the difference is and try to understand both sides of the equation. So it kind of reminds me that, okay, if we can get this working really well as a distributed company, when we have the opportunity to come back together and work together, maybe we'll be able to get the best of both worlds. Sometimes being in person, you have great workshops, great sessions, much more free form. Sometimes when you're remote, you get your quiet time, you get your focus time. So maybe we'll be able to figure out the best of both worlds.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting too, because when you, I mean, I've done both, and you know, a lot of times there's unnecessary travel that takes place when if everyone comes into the same office, and I think over time it's going to be the opposite. I think you're going to have remote people, and instead of everyone centrally going their different ways, it's going to be everyone remotely from time to time coming in. I think that's how
Yeah.
the travel is going to shift.
Yeah, I hope so because there's a lot of time we spend in traffic here in the Bay Area and other
Oh,
metro areas, and it would be wonderful to get that time back in our lives and use it more effectively. I've
yes.
definitely, before the pandemic, I was working from home a lot, and I definitely enjoyed that balance, being able to go in when I felt like it, being able to work remote when I felt like it. It was very liberating
Yes.
to kind of be in control of my schedule,
Yes.
and I really want to be able to have everybody else get that
Mhm.
benefit because it was powerful for me. Made my home work life balance, like working with my kids.
Mhm.
The flexibility was great, but then sometimes you do need to go into an office location. So hopefully we'll be able to strike a good balance in the future.
I hope so. I agree with you. So in the current situation with the ongoing pandemic, you're an example of one. Companies have been forced to go remote. They really haven't had a choice. So what do you think are the major roadblocks and challenges with that?
I mean, first and foremost, it's remote access to your resources. Like,
Mhm.
can you access everything is done on computers these days. If you're in what we'll call the knowledge worker class, the creative class, whatever you want to call that designation, we're on our computers constantly.
Mhm.
And you've got to be able to access the resources. And a lot of them were not set up sufficiently for this type of usage. That's challenge number one. Second, it's all about the, you know, Zoom, right?
Mhm.
Zoom is the new Xerox, right? It's,
Yes.
nobody else is has nailed it like this. So kudos to them and their work. So those are the two, and then it's really helping. Managers need to help their teams really put in place the boundaries of work. So make sure people are developing a routine, balancing work uh, and personal challenges they may face. It's hard. One of the interesting things that I've realized is that there's become two cohorts of remote workers in this pandemic that have very different dynamics.
Mhm.
Cohort number one is what I'll call the 20 somethings and the 50 plus somethings, right? And the other cohort is the 30 and 40s. And it's all about the age of your kids. If your kids are out of the house or you don't have them, versus if you have kids and you're homeschooling. And the obvious difference there is the people in their 20s and 50 plus, I'm hearing stories of like, I'm bored. What do I do to keep myself busy? Let's do creative things, right?
Mhm.
To engage. Anybody that's got kids is like, I am so not bored. I wish I were bored. I'm so frazzled because I've got so much to deal with. And so you've got these two different dynamics. When you come together in a work session, that the personal challenges. So as a manager, as a leader, it's really about helping whoever, it's recognizing those patterns, figuring out whoever is in one of those situations, helping them create the structure so that they can work when they can work productively. Don't force them to work when they're not productive.
Mhm.
um, if they want to work extra because they don't have anything else that they really want to be doing, figure out how to make that career beneficial to them. Take the opportunity for self-improvement, and self-improvement with the folks with kids. That's mental sanity, right? So
Mhm.
you as a manager, as a leader, you need to work on these kind of themes when you're working with your teams.
I agree. I mean, my youngest is 30, so I'm in that other group. But I do. It's funny. I think it's about 5 years old. A kid that's 5 and younger, if mommy and daddy are home, they don't understand the difference between work and home.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, I have a first grader and a seventh grader, and they're homeschooling, and they need help because the schools are not set up for
Hmm.
remote learning, right? So
Yeah.
there's a big theme here where I live about project-based learning, and when you go to do projects online completely from home, you can't work with three other kids on an assignment, so none of their work is translating to
Mm.
productive work from home. And so it's been chaos trying to get the curriculum in order.
Yeah. Yeah, it was interesting. My sister and brother-in-law, they have 3 kids at home, and all of a sudden they're all homeschooled. They're all schooling from home, and they had to go out and buy 3 new Chromebooks.
Exactly, right? Exactly.
They weren't
And then
ready.
you and
And
then
I
you
actually,
realize
yeah,
that they were never trained to be teachers.
right.
So they don't know how to help kids. How much, we all help our kids with homework. How much do you lead them to the answer? How long do you let them struggle before you step in?
Yeah,
It's something we're all learning. Like we're all teachers now.
yeah, I agree. So there's companies like Gaper that help develop, build, and scale products, especially for startups. So how important do you think that is for founders and VPs like yourself that need to hire smart, competent people quickly?
It's a really interesting question because I've worked with teams that are uh, completely subcontracted out. And
Hmm.
I've worked with teams that you take a few contractors and you have them join your existing team. And the key to it all is flexibility. Different projects, different companies need different types of structures. So I think it's critical. It will always be critical to be able to scale up development when you have the opportunity. Do the onboarding challenge. You want to hire and work with the best and brightest, but the best and brightest have to be well integrated into teams, or else their potential is not unlocked.
Hmm.
So it's about getting that team cohesion together. So companies such as Gaper can really help with best practices on, hey, here's how you build team cohesion. We've done it a lot. We
Hmm.
recognize what type of company you are. So I think it's hugely beneficial. I've worked with a number of different shops over the years. We'll always continue to work with shops. So I think there's a tremendous value that companies such as yours bring to the table.
Well, thank you. Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously we're getting more interest lately. And that's the biggest thing. It's not the actual work itself. It's the how do we do this?
Yeah.
It's the new paradigm, and people are like, what is the best practice? And it is different per company, but there are certain things like you've already talked about that hold true, I think, for most companies.
Yeah, it's very much companies will want to come to you not just for the people, but for the experience. Like
Right.
what are the other companies similar to us doing? What's worked, what hasn't? We
Hmm.
want your best recommendation. That's a huge value to offer.
Yes, I agree. Well, Colin, this has been great. I'd like to thank you
So my pleasure.
for your time today, and I wish Banyan Security well. Lots of luck. Do you start this Monday or the following Monday?
April 6th, so the following Monday.
All right. Well, good luck with your new venture.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.